Hello and welcome back. This is David Bianco. If it's your first time here, thank you for jumping on board. So I just recently celebrated 1 year with the channel, and I've pretty well eaten all that birthday cake and blown out that candle. And in reflecting on that first year, I've had some thoughts about what I learned and what happened in the industry during that first year and where we're headed into a new year. And I want to talk about that. And it relates to public relations and the vinyl community. That's coming up next here on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. So going back to the beginning when I started the channel, having been a collector of records since 1963 when I was 7 years old, I kept my collection and I've lugged it across many states, nearly 60 years, and I really have this love of music and equipment. And so I wanted a channel to be all about music, vinyl, the equipment, the artists, the industry, who were the gurus, my commentary. And my goal was to share my knowledge and my love for this and get people engaged, sharing in this love of music, as I find it to kind of be the bridge we all cross from the past to the present to the future, and it is a way to bring us all together. Now, saying that, I've obviously gone to a lot of places I really hadn't planned, which has been great, and sharing that with you has been fabulous. I still have a few more videos to put up on my trip to Europe, but as it has happened, a lot of what has happened with my channel started in mid-July of 2022 when the whole MOFI gate started, when we in fact found out that their vinyl was being mastered in a way where they had digital in the mastering chain. And when I did my video, episode 21 in mid-July, as I think I said in the video, I really didn't think I was going to ever have to make a video like that because that wasn't on my mind and it wasn't anything that I had expected. But at the same time, as a collector and as a person who bought a lot of Mobile Fidelity right from the start in the 70s, later 70s when they came out, I was taken aback by the whole situation. Not to regurgitate that, but the whole thing started that long ago. So we're talking, nearly 9 months now. And there's been a lot of activity related to MOFI, looking at the mastering chain and providing that data to us. There's been legal cases that are going and are still active right now. You can think what you like of the validity of those or what they stand for or whether they even make sense. But at the end of the day, I say I've done reviews on MoFi stuff since then. I've done reviews with DSD. I try to listen to the music and give you a fair shake on what I think of what I'm hearing, regardless of the mastering process. Because let's face it, there are many, many records we get that we really don't know for sure what the mastering process is. So this has become kind of a new look at the situation behind the curtain kind of thing. We have, of course, Analogue Productions with Chad Kassem in Salina, Kansas, and I visited there. And they are Analogue Productions. That's their claim to fame and where they focus, and where they've had to deviate that for reasons that were situations where they had no other choice. They've been upfront about that. So obviously we have a lot of transparency there. On the MoFi side, the transparency has been what they have decided to come out with vis-a-vis what they basically got caught at. There's no other way to put it. And they now, of course, I have a video with the list of records that they've said have the DSD in the mastering chain, which are part of a lawsuit. And now one of the latest things they've done is they've invited Melinda Murphy, who has a channel, and it's a great channel, and I appreciate everything she does, and she's a huge Van Halen fan and has been for a long time. It's not a new thing. And then, of course, MoFi announcing they're coming out with one steps of Van Halen's. They invited her and her hubby to come to see how they do the mastering, which hopefully we'll see a video on that and get to understand that a little better. And that's a great move. That's a great move with someone in the vinyl community. And I think that that's a long time coming, frankly. I think we all have to understand companies have a little bit of a tug of war going on when they are in a legal situation of what they should and shouldn't do, or shouldn't say. And that is, in fact, I'm sure, contributing to the situation.
Everything that guy just said is bullshit. Thank you.
But I always talk about a company's instincts. What are their real instincts? What's in their DNA? Is it in their DNA to share and to tell and to be open? Or is it in their DNA to hold back and wait for someone else to discover? Or, I think we see fairly clearly here the way MOFI operated was different than the way Analogue Productions operates, for example, because they're two primary audiophile labels that we deal with. There are others out there as well, but I'm focusing on these two because I know them the best. And so it really is a marketing thing. And I think that the MOFI situation will become a study in public relations and in the right way to approach things. You see, the way I look at it is pretty simple. I think what actually happened here with that is it appears that MFSL, Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab, before they were bought by Music Direct, was working with Sony on this technology, and it was in early formation. And as a matter of fact, they released a CD which uses that process, the Tom Petty Full Moon Fever. And that was before they went bankrupt. So that process from a digital domain was already being started. And so that continued, I'm sure, with the purchase of Mobile Fidelity by Music Direct. And as they evolved and realized they were capturing these tapes on a more neutral and less destructible format than tape, someone said, well, gee, what if we could, in fact, preserve that, and then when we had the license and the rights to be able to put something to vinyl, we had that secured. Because we all know that tape wears, tape is affected by humidity, climate, wear, use, handling. There's all these things with tape, and it never gets better. And I think that's a reality that we all have to realize as analog lovers, is that is, in fact, the reality of the matter. And I think it stared us in the face when the whole thing about Michael Jackson's Thriller came out, and we started to realize, hey, they're going to have to handle that tape how many times to make 40,000 copies at 1,000 copies per run? Okay, why would they allow that to happen? And that's how this all started. So the whole idea here of capturing that for the future and for the integrity of that has a lot of value and makes a lot of sense. And I believe, honestly, if that would have been dealt with and talked about, and for the value of why it was being done, as the technology got better and better and proof that you could A/B the two very closely, that the value of that for the long haul could have been seen and understood and appreciated. But unfortunately, by holding things back and not being upfront about it, it created a different focus, a focus of a lack of transparency. And unfortunately, when companies are not transparent, when governments aren't transparent, when politicians aren't transparent, when husbands aren't transparent, when children aren't transparent to others, this is what ends up happening. Right? So really what MOFI really was dealing with was what I call sins of omission. They failed to mention these things, and they did so, I think, knowingly because of potential backlash. But again, when you get to public relations, you really think about what they did and why they did it and where they were headed. Was it a bad thing? Was it not something that respected the fact that we need to save this information, this data, this archive, this capability of all of these records that for years have been, used and worn? And we saw what happened with the fire. I mean, we all know that you can do backups of digital and you have, the ability to maintain data. So I think, in fact, it really was a huge missed opportunity. And that's unfortunate. And it really has created some cynicism in general. There's even cynicism towards those who have been transparent, like Chad and Analogue Productions, that has happened. And I think that's unfortunate, because we should always be trying to deal with everyone's better angels. But unfortunately, that isn't really what happened here. Now, the reason I brought up Melinda going there is I think that that's a good move for a fan. She is a fan of Van Halen, and MOFI needs to try to reach out a bit, and that's a good touch point. In other words, it really blends her interests and their needs, and that's great, and I see no problem with that. Now, Melinda would be the first to tell you she's not the highest technical person, but that's not what this is about. This is about trying to bridge the gap between being part of the vinyl community and being closer to it, and seeing that there are things that can be done that work even within the legal framework of what's going on. And so I think, it's a first step. But again, there are so many questions. There are so many things that are still open. So many records that still we don't know the mastering chain on. Are we to assume that if we haven't heard yet that it's one from the list, that it isn't a DSD? I don't know. So it would be good to have a back catalog analysis that tells us explicitly whether or not there was any digital. I've heard even rumblings of people implying that this was done back in the 80s with mobile fidelity.
Bullshit.
I've seen no proof of that whatsoever. I don't know of any situation that was going on. I think, again, in the later 90s, when the Sony product was starting to be developed, and they were looking at how they do that on the digital realm for CDs, and then SACD was coming out. So at some point that crossed then over into the thought that, well, if we've captured this in a digital format at that high of a resolution, can we in fact then retain that data so that we then can use it for putting to vinyl? And as technologies improve and capabilities improve, like DSD went to DSD 256 from 64, so it went to a 4 times oversampling, and now there's even a DSD 512 not being used by mobile fidelity at this point. But my idea here is, as things get better and improved, things head in a direction where the differences become so minuscule that they really aren't going to be audible. And I think, in fact, we realize there's a lot of darn good pressings that have come out of mobile fidelity that used DSD. So it is what it is. It's unfortunate that it really got clouded by all of this awareness gap that the company has created. And I think that's the thing, having a relationship with the customer. Now, that is one thing I can say about Chad Kassem. He knows his customers. He knows what they like. He knows who they are, and he caters to them. And he also caters to his own preferences. It's his company, and that's what he wants to do. But when a guy like Chad is passionate about what he's doing, he's passionate about the content of what he's going after, we all benefit from that. So we as consumers got educated last year. That really is what started to happen. But at the end of the day, I always say it's our ears that tell us what's best, and how we hear that and what we process and whether we like it or not, given the systems that we have. That always is the final analysis. I'm not one to ever go back and say, oh, because I now know that XYZ had a DSD step in it, I don't think it sounds good. If I've said for years I think it sounds good. That's really something that I think really doesn't make sense to me. It is either good or it's bad in my mind, and I'm going to stick by that. Now, selection of whether I want to buy things in the future because of that may be something that I look at. But frankly, it's not any different than thinking of the tape life. I mean, we have the situation recently, ERC came out with The Doors, and that tape has never been in good shape. It's never been a great recording. And as time has gone on, the tape has gotten worse. So what do we have? We have a situation where we have potentially an even more accurate way to capture what's on tape being used and then yielding an output that basically tells you that tape is worn or is not the greatest shape that it could have been. And so as time goes on, these reissues actually could become worse or sound worse because they are giving us accuracy about something that is of less quality in its source. So when we start to cross those bridges, that's where the problems start to occur. And then if you think about it, if someone captured that tape back in 2010 in a DSD format, and it's been reissued several times since then, and now we're going to go back to the original tape, maybe it's worn some more, and maybe it has some dropouts or has some issues. Well, you can't get rid of some of those issues. So we have to recognize that we're in a race against time when it comes to tape. And that is a reality that I think could have been schooled and could have been made known. And I think it's important that everybody sit back and consider that and think about where we're headed and what it really says. Now, here's one more reality. My generation is dying off. Of course, that happens all the time. Generations come and go. And the music that we listen to is stuff that we really enjoyed from our youth. And it has a market going forward. But the market going forward, there's only a few bands that really retain that for decades and decades and decades. And we know who they are. You know, the Beatles, the Stones, you know, the Who, and I don't mean to exclude anybody here, but I mean there's certain groups that really stand the test of time. But by and large, most of what needs to start coming out, of course, is material that was done for later generations than us, because they will be the consumer. And as we get into that age, we're going to get a lot more digital sources, and that's going to be the bottom line. But we already know that there are great digital sources. Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms, Donald Fagen, The Nightfly. Those are two that just off the top of my head stand out, that sound great in spite of the fact that they are digital originals. So it always goes back to how well was the source recorded. So I think we learn and we grow, and as we go forward, we ask the right questions. We expect honesty and transparency. And I think we have to go back and say to MOFI, really, what is the catalog and how was it made? There's still a lot of gaps in information of certain recordings, and the data is not available yet on how it was made. I don't know that we can assume it was all analog 100% if nothing has been said so far. Now, if they come out and say, we put out everything that was DSD, everything that we don't have any information on or don't give you any information on, you could assume does not have a DSD step in it. Fine, but they have to come to that point and say that. So where do we go from here? I think the awareness is really raised. I think the expectations are raised, but I also think we need to be careful about being cynical. And that is where the warning comes in, because as consumers of this, we need to understand that we are the dividing line between whether a product gets made or not, because we buy it or we don't buy it. And the companies will find out that they have a lot of inventory of product that was overpriced. If it was overpriced, they'll find out that they have a lot of inventory of a product where the artist or the album that they selected wasn't really as popular as they might have thought. We end up dictating that. And there's a lot of talk about the pricing of this and the cost of this. And all I would say is look at the comparison of cost to what it was back in 70s, 80s, 90s when these box sets came out, when these UHQRs came out, and when audiophile presses come out and accommodate for inflation, and you will find out that we're really in the ballpark here. Now, there are some things I think that are happening in the industry with standard pressings and the increases that have occurred there that frankly are becoming a bit more of a money grab. And I think that that's a wayward sign where I think people are watching what they buy, because who wants to buy a standard one album for $35 that is just a basic average pressing? That's a bit excessive. Now, I know our friends to the north in Canada have even a bigger issue because of the exchange rate on Canadian dollars. So it really just dominoes after a while. And so put that with the quality concerns that really are always on the table regarding defective records or packaging that's problematic, including seam splits. This is something that when you're spending this kind of money, you really need to be careful. You also need to look at how long you have before you can return something, because if you're someone who sits on a record for a while and doesn't open it for a variety of reasons, then you may not be able to return it. So it's getting a little complicated in that regard, and we do have to watch our wallets and watch where we're headed with what we purchase. So the year has brought by a lot of different changes and a lot of changing perspectives. Waiting on certain things to come down in price now because of demand peak at the beginning is a strategy now, because a lot of things don't sell out initially the way they used to. So the whole approach is kind of flipped almost 180 in certain aspects, but always buyers being more informed, knowing what they're doing, knowing what the record company that's involved is providing. More information is better for decision making, and accurate and honest information is a norm that we should expect. And if anything we learned in the last year, it is that when you don't have that, it certainly can affect a business and a relationship with the consumer. I hope we see improvements in that in 2023. So thank you for joining me today. If you're not a subscriber yet, I'd appreciate if you'd consider doing that by clicking on the bell down below. The top one for all gets you notifications. Also, a thumbs up or a like is appreciated, and any comments you have are welcome. I really appreciate seeing them and try to respond to many of them. So for now, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on our Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Take care, everybody.